All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods, in for Peter. And here's the highlight of the program. We are joined by Pat Buchanan. And if you don't know who Pat Buchanan is, I almost don't know what to do for you. But Pat is, of course, Pat worked in the Nixon and Reagan White Houses. He was a founding member of McLaughlin Group, one of the great programs ever, as well as Capital Gang and Crossfire that I used to watch when I was younger. Made several memorable runs for president. I'll talk about that in a minute. And is a political analyst for MSNBC. And he has written his 7th consecutive New York Times bestseller, Suicide of a Superpower, Will America Survive in 2025? And that's what we want to talk to him about today. Pat Buchanan, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
How you doing, Tom?
I am doing great. It's fantastic to be talking to you. I'm grateful for all the kindnesses you've shown me over the years. And I want to just say, before we get into your book, that not that you need this, but I believe you are one of the most, by far the most unjustly maligned person in American media and political life. And it's interesting to note, though, when I knew Frank Luntz a little bit, in the pollster,
right.
We see on Fox a lot. In the early 90s, he spent a year at Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government as a fellow, and he worked for you briefly.
Right.
And it's interesting to note that here he was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the most fashionable thing in the world would have been to trash Pat Buchanan. But every opportunity, whenever somebody mentioned your name, Luntz said, Pat Buchanan is the single nicest person I've ever worked with in politics. So I just want you to know there is still honor out there in the world. All right, before we get to your book, I just need you to indulge me on one thing. I want to know, in 1996, when you won the New Hampshire primary, and I was watching the news, and those newscasters, it was like their dog had just died, reporting that you had won the New Hampshire primary. I just want to know, what was going through your mind? Did you expect to win? Did you think that, wow, I mean, maybe this thing is just going to take off? What was going through your mind when you won that night?
Well, we knew we had a fighting chance. I had won Alaska, and I defeated Graham and sort of finished him off, who was the main competition for the conservative crown in Louisiana, and I'd come within 3 of Dole in Iowa. And if, Alan Keyes had not been in, he got 8%, I think I would have won there. So we knew we had a fighting chance in New Hampshire. I had the union leader with me. We had a great organization and team. You didn't know you were going to win, but it was exhilarating. I tell you, it really was when they finally called it. I think we won that thing by 1 point, Tom. My friend, the late Sam Francis, who was probably more controversial than even I was, said, Pat, when the news came to D.C. About your victory in New Hampshire, Washington was like Paris when they heard Rommel had broken through in the Ardennes.
Good old Sam.
Good old Sam.
Now, I know your book is at number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list?
It was number 4 last Sunday. It'll be number 11 this Sunday. But they've got all these good books coming out, so I think I'm going to be 18 on the Sunday after this. But we've had 2 weeks in the top on the New York Times bestseller list, and hopefully we're still working at it. But there's an awful lot on there. But we're selling these Kindle books are really selling like hotcakes. Tom, it's a new thing. I was told by my publisher we've sold 10 times as many Kindle books in this book as we did Day of Reckoning, which was a bestseller in 2008, so or 2007, I think. So it is really going great guns. We're very pleased with it. We'd always like to be a little bit, but and we've been working very hard. But we've had a lot of people help us out and everything. So we're very fortunate, and we're very pleased.
Well, as I was telling people before you came on, the best revenge in this world is especially as a writer, is just to keep churning out best-selling books. They can call you all the names in the world they want to, but Pat Buchanan writes a book, it gets on the New York Times bestseller list. There aren't a lot of people who can say that. All right, let's get into the meat of the book. I mean, you're basically saying that in one way after another, demographically, economically, religiously, internationally, with foreign policy, financially, we have seen and will continue to see wrenching changes of a kind that you wouldn't think a country would voluntarily impose on itself. And so what I want to do is, just so that we don't, there's so much to say, I don't want to just talk superficially about every little bit. I want to focus on a couple areas. First, I want to talk about, you have a chapter, The Long Retreat. I want to say a little something about foreign policy and the U.S. government and imperial overstretch, where are we? Where do we stand right now? What's the mentality in Washington, bipartisan, regarding the U.S. role in the world and all that? And do you see any prospect of it changing?
Well, the elites in Washington of both parties are really do not like what is happening. They see the American people basically turning their back and saying goodbye to all that, to Iraq and Afghanistan, anxious to bring the troops home, no longer enthusiastic or even terribly interested in what is going on there, because I think the elites in this town, candidly, want to use this IAEA report, Tom, to get the Americans to launch an attack on Iran, on their embryonic nuclear facilities, such as they are. And so I think Washington is out of touch with the country. You see the Republican candidates not even talking about foreign policy because they know that Ron Paul's position, for example, has enormous resonance inside the conservative movement in the Republican Party, far greater than it did when I was arguing for bringing the troops home in the 1990s. And so that you've got a dichotomy there. But the reality is that the fiscal crisis, the financial crisis, is going to do what we should have done voluntarily ourselves at the end of the Cold War, which was wrap it up. I mean, we won the Cold War. The troops come home. They came home after World War I, and they came home after World War II. They only went back because of the rise of Stalin's empire and what it threatened. So I think that the bases are going to have to be closed. Cuts are coming in the military because there's nowhere else that the parties will agree to make any cuts. And so I think there's a certain inexorability here, but my guess is we're going to do it haphazardly rather than with any wisdom or strategically the way we should.
Do you think it's going to happen because there will be a fiscal crunch, or do you think people – I mean, I find that the biggest stumbling block people have with Ron Paul is the foreign policy. I love Ron Paul except for his foreign policy. I wish I saw more – movement toward his position among Republicans and conservatives. So you'd think they would say there's nothing conservative about spreading feminism to Afghanistan. Like what's complicated about this? Why aren't more of them getting it?
Well, I think what they fear is the base of the party. Well, the Republicans have been. We're all of us, or almost everyone. These young people who were raised in a Cold War environment. That America is the superpower. America is the one power in the world can use military force and has to maintain, what is right and good and just and all the rest. This is the way folks were raised, and it's very difficult to get them to change their thinking. I mean, with me, at the end of the Cold War in 1989, 1990, oddly, Tom, for the love the neocons bear me, oddly, it was Irving Kristol, almost mixed them up there, Irving Kristol, who was early on saying we should start bringing American troops home from Europe. You go back to Eisenhower, you read him in 1961, he's telling Kennedy, we've been over there 10 years, they're up on their feet, they're trading, their trade surpluses are bigger than ours, and now is the time to bring them home before they become dependencies. That's Eisenhower. Nixon talked about the Nixon Doctrine, that Asians would do the fighting in future Asian wars. And you get all of these people. MacArthur said, don't put your foot soldiers into Southeast Asia. I mean, these were strategic thinkers who realized America was an enormously powerful country, but we couldn't defend the whole world. And other countries had to be first responders.
All right, we're coming right back with Pat Buchanan here on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. We'll be talking about the future of America right here.